Welcome to Middle Math Academy, Statistical Questions and Dot Plots, level number 3. This is part of our differentiated series where we have 5 levels of challenge for every topic. Let's get started. Our learning targets today are: I can determine if a question is statistical or non-statistical and explain why. I can interpret a dot plot and explain what each dot represents. And I can analyze a dot plot to find the mode, minimum, and maximum. Before we get started with our notes, rate yourself on our learning targets 1 through 5. 1 is the least confident, 5 is the most confident. At the end of today's lesson, we'll come back to our learning target and we'll rate ourselves again after we've gotten some practice. Let's start with our first note on statistical questions. Make sure you're writing with me. If you ever need more time, remember you can always pause the video. Statistical questions are questions that expect different answers and need data collection to answer. Variability is the expectation that the question will have different answers. So I'm going to write an example of a statistical question. I want you to come up with your own example. Remember, we're asking a question where we're going to have multiple answers and where the answers are going to be different. My example of a statistical question is, how many pages does each 6th grader read daily? Okay, so we're talking about each 6th grader, and we can expect that not all 6th graders are going to read the same amount, so we're going to get different data. Now I want you to come up with your own statistical question. All right, let's move on to non-statistical questions. Non-statistical questions have one fixed answer and do not need data collection. So once again, I'll write an example of a non-statistical question, and then you're going to pause the video and create your own non-statistical question. So my non-statistical question is, how many pages did you read today? This is non-statistical because it's just one answer. I only asked one person. So go ahead, pause, and write your own question now. In example A and B, we're going to write if each question is statistical or non-statistical and why. So go ahead and pause the video. For example A and B, write if it's statistical or non-statistical and why. Then come back to the video to check your work. Let's check our work for A. It says, what is the height of each student in the class? This is an example of a statistical question. Okay, because we can expect different heights for each student. So we're collecting multiple pieces of data. We're asking multiple people. Let's check our work for problem B. B says, how many continents are there in the world? That has just one answer and doesn't require data collection, so that is a non-statistical question. Before we finish off our notes, I want to just go back to our learning targets. Our first learning target was determining if a question is statistical or non-statistical, and we just practiced that. Now we're going to move on to practice our next learning targets, interpreting and explaining dot plots and analyzing dot plots to find mode, minimum, and maximum. So let's finish up our notes. A dot plot is a simple way to display data using dots. Each dot on a dot plot represents one data point or one person. If there is more than one dot above a number, it means there are multiple data points with that value. If there are no dots above a number, it means there are 0 data points with that value. So we can count all of the dots to find the total number of data points. Let's just take a quick look at our dot plot at the bottom of this page. The first question says, what is the dot plot about, and what does each dot represent? So it's a two-part question. Whenever we're looking for what the dot plot is about, we can look at what's labeled under our number line. In this case, it says hours each person spends playing video games weekly. Remember, each dot represents one person surveyed. So for our first answer, we can write, the dot plot is about the number of hours each person spends playing video games weekly, and each dot represents one person and how many hours they spend playing video games weekly. So, for example, we can see that one person spends 2 hours playing video games. We have 3 people who spend 8 hours playing video games. Let's look at our next question, and then we'll finish off our notes. It says, how many total people were surveyed? Remember, each dot represents one person, so we can just count all of our dots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So we can write 25 total people were surveyed because there are 25 dots. Pause the video, make sure you have this down. Then we're going to go to the last bit of our notes and these last 3 questions. All right. The mode is the number that shows up the most in the data set. So in dot plots, it's the number with the most dots. So let's look at our dot plot at the bottom of our page and see which ones have the most dots. Well, it looks like 6 and 7 are tied for our mode. So what are our modes? If they're tied, you can just write both numbers. Our modes are 6 and 7 because they have the most dots. Our next note is minimum. The minimum is the smallest number in the data set that has a dot above it. So this is a common mistake I see from students. Remember, it's not just the smallest number on the number line. So the minimum here is not 1 because there's no dot above it. The minimum here would be 2 because that's the least amount of time someone spent playing video games. Then our last note is maximum, which is the opposite of minimum and is the largest number in the data set. Once again, that has a dot above it. I use this dot plot on purpose because I always notice that students will say, oh, 11's the maximum. But remember, there's no data above 11, so that's not the maximum. The maximum here would be 10 because it's the largest number that has a dot above it. Here's a neater look at these answers. Once you finish all of page 1, check in with your teacher to get additional feedback. Come back to the video when you're ready for page 2. Page 2 says, determine if each question is statistical or non-statistical. Explain why. Complete problems A and B. Use your notes on page 1 if you need any help. Come back to the video once you finish just these 2 problems. Check your work for problem A. Check your work for problem B. Complete the rest of page 2, then check in with your teacher. Page 3, we're still practicing that first learning target, determining if questions are statistical or non-statistical. We'll do the same thing we did on page 2. Complete A and B, then come back to the video to check your work. Check your work for problem A. Check your work for problem B. Complete the rest of page 3, then check in with your teacher. On page 4, complete all of problem A, then come back to the video to check your work. Let's check our work for the questions for problem A on page 4. What's the dot plot about? It's about the number of pets each person surveyed owns. Remember, you can always look beneath your number line to figure out what it's about. And each dot represents one person who answered the question of how many pets they own. How many people were surveyed for the dot plot? Well, we can just count the dots. When you count all of the dots, we get 17. So 17 people were surveyed because there are 17 total dots. What does each dot represent? Each dot represents the number of pets that person owns. All right, the minimum on this dot plot, the smallest number that has a dot above it, is 0. The maximum is 5. And the mode, I always think mode most. The dots with the most are 1. So the most people have 1 pet. All right, this next question, how many people own less than 2 pets? So we can't include 2. So we're not including 2, but we're including all of the dots that are less than 2. So if we count all of these dots, we get 13. So 13 people own less than 2 dots. And then this next question, how many people own more than 1 pet? So it can't be 1 pet, it has to just include more than 1 pet. So we have 3 dots here, 1 dot here. So 4 people own more than 1 pet. Complete the rest of page 4, then check in with your teacher to get additional feedback. Complete example A on page 5, then come back to the video to check your work. Our first question, what does each dot represent? We can look beneath our number line to figure that out. Each dot shows how many hours one student watched TV on the weekend. So each dot is one person surveyed. Our next question, how many people were surveyed for the dot plot? To figure out our total survey, we count how many dots we have. 31 students were surveyed because there are 31 dots on the dot plot. Next question, what is the minimum? So if you said 0, that is not correct. And here's why. There are no dots above 0. The minimum is the smallest number that has data points. So the minimum is 1. All right, maximum. The maximum, if you said 10, that is wrong. The maximum is 9 because it's the highest number that has a data point above it. Next question. What is the mode? The mode is the number with the most dots. Mode most. So the number with the most dots is 1 hour. So the mode is 1. How many students watched over 5 hours of TV? So we're not including 5. We're just talking about the dots that are over 5 hours. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dots that are over 5 hours. And then last question, how many students watch 3 hours of TV on the weekends? So we're just counting 3 hours. So we'll go to 3. We can count our dots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 students watch 3 hours of TV on the weekend. Complete the rest of page 5, then check in with your teacher to get additional feedback. Complete all of page 6. Once you finish the entire page, come back to the video. We're only going to check one problem on this page. We're going to check error analysis number 2. Jaden and Kyle are looking at the dot plot below. Jaden says the maximum is 5 because it's the biggest number on the number line. Kyle said the maximum is 3 because it's the biggest number that has a dot above it. Who is correct? Explain. Well, Kyle is correct. The maximum is the biggest number that has at least one dot above it. In this dot plot, 3 is the maximum because it's the highest number with a dot above it. Even though 5 is the biggest number on the number line, it doesn't have a dot above it. So it doesn't have any data. Nobody in this survey owned 5 pets. Now that you finished all of page 6, you're going to go back to page 1. And as promised, now that we've gotten some more practice, you're going to rate yourself after the lesson in our learning targets. Once you finish rating yourself on page 1, check in with your teacher to get additional feedback. Thank you for joining us today at Middle Math Academy, where we practiced statistical questions and dot plots level number 3. This is part of our differentiated series where we have 5 levels of challenge for every topic. If you're looking for any additional practice, make sure to check out level number 1, level 2, level 4, or our most challenging level, level number 5. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.